I knew something was wrong the moment the nurse looked at me the way people look at a dog that's about to bite. Not scared, just cautious, prepared, distant. At 78, I've seen enough eyes to know when someone has already decided who you are before you even speak. She held the chart against her chest as if it might shield her and said, very gently, "Your daughter-in-law mentioned you've been aggressive and confused." Aggressive. Confused. Two words I have never worn, not even on my worst days. The ceiling light hummed softly above me. My hip ached from the fall. Nothing dramatic. Just one of those small betrayals the body commits without warning. But my mind was clear, sharper than the sterile smell of this hospital room. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it, but laughter requires air, and I felt none in my lungs. "Did she now?" I asked. The nurse smiled politely, the way people smile at old women whose thoughts they no longer trust. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and murmured something about routine precautions. I nodded because arguing would only make me fit the story someone else had begun writing about me. I heard footsteps before I saw her. Light, quick, rehearsed. Emily always walked that way, as if she were arriving somewhere where applause might break out at any moment. When she entered the room, she wore her usual smile, the one that curled at the edges like a ribbon tied too tight. "Oh, Maeve," she said, coming to my bedside, "you scared us all." Not me, us, as if we were some united body, some warm collective. Her hand touched mine briefly, cool fingers, perfectly manicured, a softness that never warmed. "I told the staff about your episodes," she continued lightly, "just so they'd keep an eye on you." Episodes. Another word that didn't belong to me. I didn't correct her. I simply watched the way her eyes flicked to the nurse, measuring her reaction, planting seeds. Emily always had a way of adjusting reality like fabric. Pull here, pinch there, make it fit her shape. The nurse excused herself, and the room fell quiet except for the faint beeping of the monitor beside me. Emily leaned over as if to straighten my blanket, but her hands didn't touch it. Her face was close enough that I could smell her perfume. Sweet, expensive, clinging. "You should rest," she said softly. "Things will be easier once you stop fighting." Fighting? I had done no such thing. But before I could ask, she glanced toward the corner near the ceiling. Only then did I notice the small black dome of the camera, blinking its green light. Her smile widened, not kindly, not cruelly, something in between, like satisfaction that had been waiting its turn. She thought I didn't see it. "Sleep, Maeve," she whispered, almost tender. "Just let go of all this control." For her, I closed my eyes, not in obedience, but in observation. A woman my age learns to gather truths the way others gather wildflowers. Quietly, carefully, without showing the hand. She lingered a moment longer. I heard the soft rustle of her sleeve, the faint shift of her breath. And then, in a voice meant for no one but herself, too low, she believed, for waking ears, she said, "Soon enough." The door clicked shut behind her. I opened my eyes to the pale rectangle of light on the floor. The camera's gentle blink kept its rhythm in the corner. Patient, watchful, aggressive, confused. No, not yet. Not at all, and not nearly as blind as she hoped. I kept my eyes closed a little longer after she left, the way you hold a door half shut to see if someone will try to push it open. But the room stayed still. Only the monitor's soft rhythm marked the passage of seconds. When I finally opened my eyes, the light had shifted across the floor, thinner, more hesitant. as if it too sensed something in the air that wasn't meant to be breathed. I am not a dramatic woman. Life cures you of that. 40 years of marriage, one son, a quiet widowhood. Nothing in my history suggests a taste for theatrics. So when I tell you that the silence in that room felt purposeful, I am not exaggerating. It was the silence of someone waiting for me to perform the role they had written. I shifted slightly, testing my hip. Pain? Yes. But pain is an honest thing. It tells you where you stand. Confusion, however, that was the word they were trying to hang on me. I repeated it in my head the way one tests a foreign object found in a coat pocket. It didn't belong to me. A soft knock came at the door. Not Emily's crisp, decisive tapping. This was gentler, uncertain. A young nurse stepped inside, the same one from earlier, though her expression was different now. Less guarded, more curious. "Mrs. Hargreaves," she said, "are you feeling up to a bit of water?" I nodded. She poured it carefully, as if expecting me to miss the cup or spill it down my gown. I didn't. My hands have steadied babies, stitched hems, signed documents that mattered. I drank slowly, and her shoulders seemed to loosen. "You're very clear," she murmured to herself. Then, louder, "Your daughter-in-law mentioned that you were confused today." There it was again, dropped like a stone in still water. I decided not to defend myself. Not yet. Instead. "Did she say anything else?" The nurse hesitated. She wasn't supposed to repeat private notes, but sometimes truth escapes through the smallest cracks. "She said you'd been unpredictable, that you'd shouted at her earlier." I looked at the wall, the camera blinking in the corner. "Did she mention the fall?" "Yes. She said it happened because you became upset." I breathed in deeply, letting the unfairness settle in my chest the way dust settles on forgotten furniture. Carefully, quietly, layer by layer. I had fallen because my leg gave way on the kitchen tile. Nothing more. No shouting, no confusion. But she was building a version of me that matched her convenience. A woman slipping away, unsteady, a burden ready to be managed. The nurse adjusted my blanket with a gentleness that didn't feel rehearsed. "You don't seem confused to me," she said. "Not at all." I met her eyes. Young, honest. The kind that still believes people tell the truth unless proven otherwise. "I'm glad someone notices." She hesitated again, then stepped closer, lowering her voice. "When family gives us notes about a patient's mental state, we're supposed to monitor closely, but I haven't seen anything unusual. I just wanted you to know that." A small warmth opened inside me, faint but real. Support often arrives in quiet forms: a nurse's doubt, a gentle pause, a simple human observation. She left after checking my vitals, and the room returned to its hush. But now the silence felt different. Not hostile, pregnant with possibility. I listened to the distant clatter of carts in the hallway, the soft conversation 2 doors down, the hum of the air vents, ordinary sounds. And yet I felt the edges of my world sharpening. Emily's words, the nurse's doubts, the camera blinking steadily. Threads forming a pattern. They wanted confusion from me. They wanted fragility. They wanted a woman too overwhelmed to question anything. I lay back against the pillows, letting my body rest but not my mind. I have lived long enough to know when someone is preparing a story about me. And I have also lived long enough to know how to undermine it. Quietly, patiently, without raising my voice. The camera blinked again, steady as a heartbeat. I closed my eyes not to sleep, but to listen more closely. I heard them before I saw them. A pair of voices in the hallway, low enough to suggest privacy, but not low enough to escape an old woman with a thin hospital door and years of practice listening through walls. When you age, people forget you have ears. They forget your mind has not frayed simply because your body has softened. The first voice was Emily's, bright and purposeful, shaped like a smile a person doesn't actually feel. The second belonged to the attending physician, a man I had met only once, but who had already begun looking at me the way professionals look at a problem someone else has labeled for them. She didn't recognize her surroundings this morning, Emily said softly. She asked about her husband. He's been gone for 8 years. A pause. The kind that hopes to be mistaken for concern. My husband's name did not pass her lips. Just husband. As though love could be removed as cleanly as dust wiped from a shelf. The doctor murmured something I couldn't fully hear. Something about monitoring cognitive stability. Emily lowered her voice even further. She can become defensive when she's confused. I'm worried about her judgment, about her safety. About decisions she might try to make later. Ah, there it was. Not even hidden. Decisions. Judgment. Safety. Words that belong in legal assessments, not family conversations. I shifted slightly in my bed, careful not to groan. The camera blinked above me, patient, tireless. I wondered how much of their talk it could hear. Probably nothing. The hallway was too far. Still, it comforted me to know that my silence was being recorded. Silence tells its own story when paired with someone else's lies. Their voices moved closer, then stopped just outside my door. I held still, eyes half closed, body calm. A woman my age can pretend to be asleep without rehearsal. She should rest, the doctor said. A fall can be disorienting. Emily sighed. She is very good at sighs, using them like punctuation. Yes, but it isn't just today. She's been worsening for months. Small things, slips, strange comments. Strange comments? The only strange comments in this family came from her, whispered in tones sweet enough to rot the truth beneath them. The nurse, the younger one, must have approached then, because I heard her voice join theirs, quiet but steady. I've been with her most of the morning, she said. She's oriented, calm, very clear. A silence followed, tight and uncomfortable. I imagined Emily's smile freezing slightly at the edges. Oh, she replied lightly. Well, sometimes she has lucid patches. It can change quickly. Lucid patches. She had found a phrase sticky enough to cling to any moment that didn't support her story. The doctor thanked the nurse, then stepped away. Emily lingered. I sensed her hand hovering over the door handle. She did not come in. Whatever she needed to say next, she wanted to say without witnesses. Finally, I heard her walk off, her heels clicking briskly against the polished floor. A departing heartbeat of false concern. The nurse entered a moment later. She stopped just inside, studying my face the way one studies a sky to know if a storm is real or imagined. Were you awake? She asked softly. I was resting, I answered. That was true in its way. Resting is not the same as sleeping. Resting is preparation. She walked closer. I just wanted to check in. I don't get the sense that you're confused at all. I met her eyes. People see what they expect to see. She hesitated, then sat on the edge of the chair beside my bed. Her voice lowered. Your daughter-in-law seems very involved. That she is. She told us she's managing your legal paperwork. Are you aware of that? I breathed slowly, letting each word find its place before I answered. I am aware she wants to manage it. The nurse's brow tightened. If you ever need someone notified, someone not her, you can tell me. I'll make sure the message gets through. It was a simple offer. But in situations like mine, simple things matter more than grand gestures. A door held open. A sentence not swallowed. A doubt allowed to surface. "Thank you," I said. "You're very kind." She stood, smoothing the front of her uniform. "I just want to make sure we're seeing you as you are, not as someone else describes you." When she left, the quiet returned, but it no longer felt empty. It felt attentive. I folded my hands on the blanket, letting the weight of my own clarity settle. Let them whisper outside doors. Let them plant their little seeds. Lies are delicate things. They cannot survive too much light. I turned my head slightly toward the camera and breathed out, slow and steady. I was not confused, and I was not alone. My son arrived late in the afternoon, long after the lunch trays had been collected, and the hallway had fallen into that midday stillness hospitals know so well. I heard his footsteps before I saw him. He still walks like the boy he used to be, heavy at the heel, impatient at the toe. But when he appeared in the doorway, he looked older than I remembered. Or perhaps just worn down by the life he'd built with a woman who always seemed to drain instead of give. "Mom," he said, trying for warmth. "How are you feeling?" I studied him quietly. The worry in his face was real, but it was shaped by someone else's narrative. Emily's words hung around him like perfume he didn't choose to wear. "I'm sore," I said, "but clear." He nodded too quickly, as if rehearsed. "Emily told me you were disoriented this morning." There it was again. They always pause before that word as though giving me time to crumble into it. I watched him sink into the chair beside me. His knee bounced the way it did when he was 10 and expected to be scolded. I didn't scold him then, and I wouldn't now. People under someone else's influence rarely know they're under it. "What exactly did she say?" I asked. He rubbed his face. "Just that you seemed confused, that you didn't know where you were, and that you thought Dad was still alive." His voice softened. "Mom, you know he's gone." "I do," I said. "And I didn't say otherwise." He hesitated. "Emily wouldn't lie." I didn't respond. There are moments when silence teaches more than any argument ever could. I let my eyes rest on him, steady, unbroken. He shifted under the weight of it. "You look fine now," he said, sounding almost puzzled. "Sharper than she made it seem." "Tom," I said gently, "has it occurred to you that your wife might be mistaken?" He shook his head too quickly again, an automatic defense. No, she's been very attentive. She said she's been worried about you for a while." "Has she said that to me?" He looked away. That told me enough. I spoke softly, aware of how easily harshness can break a person already fraying. "Your wife has strong ideas about who I am becoming. Ideas that don't match who I am." He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture he inherited from his father. "Mom, I just don't want anything happening to you. Emily says we need to think ahead. She mentioned maybe some legal protections." "Protections for whom?" I asked. He froze. The question hung in the air between us, simple and devastating. "I'm not implying anything," he said quickly. "It's just paperwork. She said it could help avoid problems later." Problems. Another vague container for whatever she might want to fit inside. I wished then, not for youth, not for strength, but for the days when conversation between us required no translations, when he'd bring me crumpled drawings or math homework, or questions about constellations. Back then, he trusted what he saw with his own eyes. Now he trusted what she whispered. The nurse came in briefly to check my vitals. Tom watched her work, watched how she spoke to me, calm, respectful, without the hesitation he'd expected. I noticed the flicker of confusion cross his face. A small moment, but important. A crack in the shell Emily had built around him. When the nurse left, he cleared his throat. "You really do seem okay." "I am okay," I said. "What you're hearing from me is the truth. What you're hearing from her serves her purposes, whatever they are." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. "I don't know what to think." "That's a start," I told him. "Thinking is better than repeating." He let out a long breath, shoulders slightly lowered, as though something inside him had shifted, even if only by an inch. "I'll come back tomorrow," he said. I nodded. "Come as yourself, Tom. Not as her messenger." He didn't deny the accuracy of that request. He just stood there a moment longer, the weight of my words settling into him, and then he left the room quietly. The light from the hallway dimmed as the door closed, and I lay back against the pillows, letting the silence return to its natural shape. It was the first time in a long while that I felt him turning toward me instead of away. The next morning brought a softer light into the room, the kind that makes the world look harmless, even when it isn't. I lay awake long before anyone entered, listening to the carts rolling down the hallway and the distant murmur of nurses changing shifts. Hospitals have their own kind of dawn, slow, cautious, never fully warm. When the younger nurse stepped into my room, she carried herself differently today, more deliberate, as though something she had seen or heard had settled uneasily inside her. "Good morning, Mrs. Hargreaves," she said, checking the monitor. "How did you sleep?" "Lightly," I said. "But well enough." She nodded. As she adjusted the blood pressure cuff, her eyes flicked to the camera, then back to me. "Has anyone visited yet?" she asked. "No. My son said he'd come later." A small hesitation. Then she pulled the chair closer to my bedside, as if she'd been debating whether to sit at all. "Can I ask you something?" she said softly. "You may." She folded her hands in her lap, a gesture too careful for her age. "Has anyone pressured you about legal matters recently? Or suggested you can't manage your own decisions?" So Emily had been talking again, pushing her narrative deeper into the places she thought I couldn't reach. "My daughter-in-law has ideas," I said. "But ideas don't make truth." The nurse breathed out slowly. "Thank you. I just needed to hear it in your own words." She finished her checks and was about to leave when a voice drifted in from the hallway, sharp, impatient. "Emily." She never hid her footsteps. She walked like someone who expected doors to open before she reached them. The nurse straightened. "I'll be back later," she said quickly, and slipped out. A moment later, Emily appeared in the doorway, carrying a small cosmetic bag and her usual curated expression of concern. She always chose concern. It looked better on her than sincerity. "Maeve," she said, "I brought you some vitamins. You've been forgetting yours at home." Vitamins. She set the bottle on the bedside table with a little too much emphasis, as if she were placing evidence for an audience. The label was generic, the kind sold cheaply, and often used to disguise stronger pills. I didn't touch it. "Thank you," I said, neutral. "You should take them now," she urged. "They'll help with clarity." Clarity. How ironic. I reached toward the bottle slowly, giving her time, just enough time for someone else to witness. And like a quiet answer to a prayer I hadn't said aloud, The young nurse reappeared in the doorway with a chart in hand. "Mrs. Hargreaves," she said, "I forgot to check one last thing." Emily stiffened slightly. The nurse walked over, picked up the vitamin bottle, examined the label, and frowned. "We can't allow outside medication without approval. I'll need to take this to the supervising nurse." Emily's smile thinned. "It's just supplements. Perfectly safe." "I'm sure," the nurse said evenly, "but it's still against protocol." Emily opened her mouth, closed it again, and stepped back. Not out of respect for the rules, she respected nothing she didn't write herself, but because the nurse had interrupted the moment she needed. And Emily hated interruptions. When the nurse left with the bottle, Emily leaned closer to me, her voice sweetened. "You should have taken them when I told you to." I met her gaze, calm as a still pond. And yet, here we are. For a second, something unmasked flickered across her face. Not anger, calculation. Then she straightened, smoothing the sleeve of her blouse with slow precision. "You're making this harder than it has to be," she said softly. Harder for whom, she didn't say. She left without another word. The room felt larger once she was gone, as if her presence had compressed the air. Minutes later, the nurse returned, her expression troubled but steady. She sat again, closer this time. "You did the right thing," she said quietly. "I only did nothing," I replied. "That," she said, "is sometimes the loudest thing a person can do." I rested my hands on the blanket and let her words settle. Silence, after all, is not the same as surrender. It is simply a place where truth gathers its strength. The afternoon light had dulled by the time the nurse returned with a clipboard held tightly against her chest. She glanced toward the hallway before stepping inside, as if she wanted to make sure she wasn't being observed. When she closed the door, she didn't move toward the machines or my chart. Instead, she pulled the chair closer, right beside my bed this time. "Mrs. Hargreaves," she said quietly, "I want to show you something." The way she said it, carefully, almost reluctantly, told me she had crossed an internal boundary long before she entered the room. She wasn't acting as a nurse in that moment. She was acting as a witness. She raised her hand and motioned toward the corner of the ceiling, the same place Emily's eyes had flicked yesterday. I followed her gesture, though I already knew what hung there, the small black dome blinking steadily. "It records continuously," she said, "both video and audio." My breath remained steady. "And who has access?" "Administration," she answered. "But staff can request reviews if there's suspicion of mishandled care or inappropriate behavior." "Inappropriate behavior," I repeated, letting the words rest on my tongue. "That covers many things." She nodded. "It does." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The beeping of the monitor sounded louder in the quiet, an even heartbeat, untroubled. I folded my fingers on the blanket, letting the clarity of the moment settle inside me. "I can make a formal request," she said, "but it will draw attention, and I need to be certain it's warranted." She didn't look away when she said it. She wanted the truth directly, without careful phrasing or polite evasions. "What did you hear yesterday?" I asked. She hesitated. "Enough to know your daughter-in-law has strong opinions about your abilities. Enough to feel I should verify things for myself." I nodded. "You were right to verify." Her shoulders loosened slightly, relieved by my steadiness. "I've taken care of many elderly patients," she said. "Some confused, some frightened, some sharp as glass. You know exactly where you are." "I do," I said, "and I know exactly what is being built around me." The nurse lowered her voice further. I requested a small portion of the audio from earlier today, just the segment from when your daughter-in-law tried to give you those vitamins. She paused, giving me space in case I wanted to stop her. I didn't. I haven't listened yet, she continued, but I know the request alone will be on record. That means if anything unusual is found, administration has to document it. The thought wasn't comforting, exactly, but it was grounding. Events were no longer drifting in the shadows. They were being written down, time-stamped, made real to more than one pair of eyes. Thank you, I said, not lightly. It matters. She looked at me for a long moment. You remind me of my grandmother, she said quietly. She taught me that silence can be a shield, but it can also be a door. You just have to know when to open it. A wise woman, I said. She smiled faintly, then rose. I'll let you rest. If I hear anything from administration, I'll tell you. After she left, the room settled into its familiar stillness. But now the silence felt charged, aware of itself. The camera's small green blink seemed steadier, as if it too understood its role. I lay back against the pillows, letting the afternoon roll gently toward evening. The fall that had brought me here, a simple misstep on cold tile, felt like a different life. Physical pain heals in its own time. But the pain of being recast by someone you once welcomed into your home, that pain demands something else. Patience, clarity, witnesses. I turned my head slightly, watching the door. People believe manipulation requires volume, but it doesn't. Sometimes it's a whisper. Sometimes it's a bottle of vitamins placed exactly where someone hopes you will take it without question. And sometimes, without meaning to, they do it under a camera meant for safety, not secrets. I closed my eyes, not to hide from anything, but to listen to the soft machinery that kept time around me. Truth rarely rushes. It arrives one piece at a time, and a piece had just been set in motion. I woke from a shallow doze to the sound of footsteps. 3 sets of them, moving briskly, not in panic but with purpose. The hallway outside my room had grown busier since morning, a shift in atmosphere that hospitals often experience without explanation. But when one step paused directly at my door, I knew it belonged to someone who had come not to check vitals or deliver a tray. The nurse entered, not hurried, but alert. She closed the door behind her, the click softer than usual. She carried no equipment this time, just her badge and a small clipboard that looked untouched. Mrs. Hargreaves, she said. I reviewed the recording. The room seemed to hold its breath with me. She sat, folding her hands in her lap. The audio from earlier, it captured more than I expected. I waited. Your daughter-in-law's tone, the way she spoke to you when she thought no one was listening. It isn't consistent with concern. And the bottle she brought, there was no pharmacist label. Administration flagged it. She didn't say everything at once. She allowed space between her sentences, the way people do when they know their words will alter the shape of someone's day. There is enough for us to file an internal report, she said gently. It won't be confrontational. It simply requires her behavior to be reviewed. Emily would not like that. But I felt no fear, only the quiet relief of something shifting slightly out of her hands. As the nurse spoke, the door inched open, and a familiar figure entered. A woman in a navy blazer, with a badge clipped to her pocket. Not medical, administrative. She nodded at me with the polite seriousness reserved for matters that require documentation. I'm here on routine protocol, she said. May I speak with you a moment? Routine. Such a comforting word when used truthfully. such a dangerous one when used to disguise ulterior motives. But her tone held no duplicity. She asked simple questions. Was I aware of what medications I was allowed to take? Did anyone bring me supplements without permission? Had I felt pressured or uncomfortable at any time? I answered calmly. There was no need to dramatize. Truth does not need staging. The nurse remained in the room, silent but steady, a presence that anchored the conversation. When the administrator finished her notes, she thanked me and stepped out. The nurse stayed seated a moment longer. She seemed to want to say something, but wasn't sure if she should. Finally, she leaned in slightly. I want you to know I'm watching this situation closely. You are not alone in it. I nodded. I know. She touched my hand, lightly, respectfully, and then left. The room exhaled into its familiar quiet, but it no longer felt like the quiet of isolation. It felt like the kind that follows the first crack of light under a long closed door. Not long after, the curtain rustled, and an orderly stepped inside to check the equipment. He moved efficiently, adjusting the monitor cords, shifting the stand, clearing a paper cup from the table. Routine motions, unremarkable. But when he turned to leave, his eyes flicked briefly toward the camera, then toward me. A small gesture, barely a second long, but one that carried recognition. People were starting to see. Later, when lunch arrived, a bland tray of soup, bread, and something pretending to be chicken, I noticed an additional item tucked on the side. A note, written in neat handwriting: do not eat or drink anything brought from outside. N. No dramatics, no warnings in capital letters, just a steady piece of advice from someone who had decided the truth mattered enough to act on. I folded the note and slipped it under my pillow. Not out of fear, but out of respect for what it represented. Another witness. Another small thread pulled away from the fabric Emily was trying so carefully to weave. The afternoon stretched quiet and long. My hip throbbed, but pain was familiar, pain I could manage. What I could not manage was pretense, and fortunately, I no longer had to pretend. Not with the nurse, not with administration, and perhaps soon, not with my son. Outside the window, the sky dimmed, pale clouds drifting across it like thoughts not yet spoken. It occurred to me then that truth rarely arrives abruptly. It collects quietly, piece by piece, until even the one who hoped to bury it must face its shape. I rested my hands together, letting the ease of that realization wash through me. A story had begun shifting, and not the one Emily intended to tell. The social worker arrived just after noon, announced by the faint scrape of sensible shoes along the hall. I recognized the rhythm, unhurried, unafraid of silence. People who do difficult work learn to walk that way. When she entered, she offered a small nod, respectful but not timid. Her badge read L. Hartwell, though she introduced herself simply as Lydia. Mrs. Hargreaves, she said, pulling a chair near the bed. I'm here because a request was filed to assess your cognitive status and overall capacity. It's a standard procedure. Standard. Another word that can be used to disguise intention. But Lydia's tone didn't hide anything. It was calm, almost gentle, the way one speaks to someone they expect to answer clearly. Do you know who filed the request? I asked. She lifted her clipboard, glanced briefly, then lowered it again. It was submitted under the daughter-in-law's name. Not surprising. Still, hearing it spoken aloud settled something inside me. Confirmation is a quiet sort of comfort. Lydia folded her hands. Before we begin, I like to make one thing clear. I don't assess based on anyone else's descriptions. Only what I observe, what you tell me, and what aligns with your medical records. Fair? Fair, I said. Her questions were straightforward. Name, date, location. I answered each without strain. She moved on to memory, reasoning, orientation. Places where confusion leaves fingerprints. I offered her none. She didn't rush through anything, nor did she stretch the process out. She simply watched me with an attention that felt neither condescending nor suspicious. Halfway through, she paused. Your responses are very consistent, she said. There's no sign of disorientation, no hesitation with personal history. How have you been feeling emotionally? It was an honest question. I gave an honest answer. A bit cornered, I said, but not by my mind. That made her sit back slightly, studying my face the way one studies a map for missing roads. Can you tell me more? I considered my words, not because I didn't know what to say, but because truth must be shaped gently when it involves someone your child married. My daughter-in-law believes, I said slowly, that I am no longer capable of managing myself. She speaks of confusion where there is none. She speaks of episodes that never occurred. Lydia made a small notation. How long have you felt she's been framing you this way? Months, I said. But the pressure has become clearer since my fall. She waited. A patient woman. She has interests, I continued. Legal ones, financial ones, and she prefers a version of me that supports those interests. There was no tremor in my voice, just weariness, clean and simple. Lydia nodded, not surprised. These situations happen more often than people admit. Elder adults are vulnerable to misrepresentation by relatives who stand to benefit. I am vulnerable in body, I said, not in mind. I can see that. Her pen didn't move for several seconds. She wasn't writing anymore. She was thinking. Mrs. Hargreaves, she said carefully, I will conduct the rest of the assessment, but I want you to know nothing I've observed suggests cognitive impairment. Nothing. That word, nothing, settled over me like warm cloth. She continued with a few final tasks, recalling a short list of items, interpreting a simple scenario, following a two-step direction. All mundane, all easily within reach of a functioning mind. When we finished, she closed her folder. I'll note in my report that you are fully oriented, demonstrate capacity, and show no evidence of decline. This request, she added, appears to have been made without medical basis. Without medical basis, a polite way of saying unwarranted. Will my son be informed? I asked. Yes. And so will the doctor overseeing your care. She stood, smoothing her blazer. I want you to feel safe here. If there are concerns regarding anyone's behavior toward you, you may tell me directly. I appreciate that, I said. And I did. Deeply. She left as quietly as she arrived, leaving behind the faint scent of peppermint and professionalism. The room settled around me again, but the air felt less weighted than before. A process had begun, documented, official, no longer just whispered concern in a hallway. I folded my hands, letting calm return to me slowly. Truth, once written, becomes very hard to erase. Tom arrived sooner than I expected, barely an hour after Lydia left. His steps were quick, uneven, the way a person walks when they're already rehearsing what they want to say. He didn't knock. He simply appeared in the doorway, eyes searching my face as if he expected to find answers written there. Mom, he said, and his voice cracked slightly, just enough for me to hear the strain beneath it. Can we talk? I nodded. He came inside, closed the door halfway, then sat on the edge of the chair like someone bracing for impact. "I got a call," he said, "from the social worker." I let the silence open around us. He needed room to speak. "She said you passed the assessment. Completely. No confusion. No signs of decline." He swallowed hard. She sounded surprised the request was even filed. There it was, the beginning of understanding, faint but real. He rubbed his forehead, his fingers tight. "Mom, Emily told me you'd been slipping for months, that you'd forgotten things, that you'd been mixing up days, names, places." His voice softened. I believed her. I didn't move. Sometimes staying still is the only way to let truth settle exactly where it needs to. "I feel like an idiot," he whispered. "Like I've been sleepwalking through my own life." "You trusted your wife," I said gently. "That isn't foolish. It's human." He looked at me then, really looked. His mother, the woman who raised him, not the fragile figure Emily had painted. "She said the fall was because you were disoriented," he went on. "She said you yelled at her. She said you mentioned Dad as if he were still alive." "I didn't," I said simply. He nodded, the motion slow and heavy, like a door closing on an old belief. "And the pills she brought today," he added. "Lydia mentioned they weren't cleared. Why would she bring you anything without telling me?" He wasn't ready to voice the true question. What was she trying to achieve? But I could hear it circling just beneath his words. I rested my hand over his, the way I used to when he was a child, trying to make sense of a world that didn't always make room for gentleness. "Tom," I said quietly, "what matters now is that you see what's happening, not what someone wants you to see." He nodded again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was decisive. "I need to talk to her," he said, a tremor of anger tightening his jaw. "I need to know why she did this, why she lied, why she—" He stopped himself. The word framed hovered unsaid, but it lived clearly in his silence. "When you speak with her," I said, "stay calm. People show their truth when they think they still control the room." He exhaled shakily. "I don't know who I'm married to anymore." "That," I said softly, "is something only you can decide. In time." He sat back, running his thumb along the seam of his jeans, a habit from adolescence he'd never outgrown. Then he looked at me with a clarity I hadn't seen in years. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said, "for believing something was wrong with you when nothing was." "You're here now," I replied. "That's what matters." He squeezed my hand, stronger than he meant to, and stood. "I'll come back after I speak to her." When he left, the room grew quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet, not fearful, not uncertain, a quiet that belonged to a truth finally beginning to breathe. The room felt unusually still that evening, the kind of stillness that comes not from peace, but from anticipation. I could sense the movement of people in the hallway, shoes, carts, clipped conversations, but my room sat in its own pocket of quiet. Even the monitor beside me seemed to beep more gently. When the door opened, it wasn't Tom. It was the young nurse, holding a tablet and wearing a seriousness I hadn't seen before. "Mrs. Hargreaves," she said softly, "administration approved the request. We have access to the footage." She didn't ask if I wanted to see it. She already knew the answer. She angled the tablet toward me, adjusting the brightness. The video began with my room earlier that day. Me lying still, eyes open, the light thin across the floor. The microphone caught the subtle sounds. My breath, the rustle of blankets. Then Emily's heels appeared at the threshold. I watched her walk toward me, her posture perfect, her expression set into that familiar mask of concern. Only this time, I wasn't seeing it through memory. I was seeing it through evidence. She placed the bottle on my table. Her voice came through the speaker clearly. "You need these. They'll help with clarity." Even in the recording, her tone felt rehearsed, sweetened, calculated. Then came the part I remembered vividly, her leaning closer, lowering her voice so I would be the only one to hear it. "You should have taken them when I told you to." The words were unmistakable, captured cleanly by the microphone. The nurse paused the video. We didn't speak at first. The moment didn't require commentary. "This," she said quietly, "is enough to raise a formal red flag." "And the earlier things she said by my bedside?" I asked. "There's more," she replied. "I haven't reviewed all of it yet, but there are several segments where she speaks to you assuming you're asleep." That was exactly what I had suspected. What people reveal when they believe the audience is unconscious is often more honest than what they say to a waking face. She scrubbed through the footage. Another clip loaded. Yesterday morning. Emily leaning close, her smile faint and satisfied as she murmured, "Soon enough." Hearing it again, stripped of the warmth of the room and filtered through the objectivity of a recording, made the words even colder. The nurse stopped the tablet there. She rested it against her knee, fingers tightening slightly around the frame. "Mrs. Hargreaves, this is not normal behavior for a caregiver or a relative. This suggests intent to influence decisions you are fully capable of making." "Yes," I said. "It does." A knock sounded at the door. Soft, hesitant. Before the nurse could respond, the door opened just enough for a familiar face to appear. Tom. His eyes looked different. Unsettled, searching, carrying the weight of something he had just learned. "I spoke to her," he said. "And I think I need to see whatever that is." The nurse glanced at me for permission. I nodded. Tom stepped inside, closing the door behind him with care. The nurse handed him the tablet. He watched the clip in silence, jaw tightening with every second. When the whispered words played, he flinched as if struck. When the video ended, he lowered the tablet slowly. "She said none of this happened," he murmured. "She said you were imagining it." "She said the nurses misunderstood." "I know what she said," I replied gently. He looked at me then, really looked, his confusion giving way to something sharper, sadder. "She wanted you declared incompetent," he said. "She's been preparing the paperwork." I didn't answer. The truth was already sitting plainly between us. He exhaled shakily, rubbing a hand across his face. "Mom, I'm so sorry." "You are seeing clearly now," I said. "That is enough." The nurse stood, gathering the tablet. She offered Tom a sympathetic nod before slipping quietly out of the room. He stayed beside me a long moment, his voice lowered, steadier than before. "I won't let her do this. I promise you that." I rested my hand over his, feeling the warmth of his grip return. Not forced, not withheld, just present. For the first time since all this began, he was entirely with me. Tom returned the next morning, looking as though he'd slept little, if at all. There was a heaviness to him, not fatigue exactly, but the weight of a man who has discovered something he can't yet reconcile with the life he thought he was living. He stood in the doorway for a moment before entering, as if unsure whether he deserved the right to walk in without permission. "Mom," he said, his voice rough. She didn't deny anything. She just twisted it. I nodded for him to sit. He lowered himself into the chair, elbows on his knees, hands clasped tightly together. I could see his fingers trembling. She said the video was out of context, he went on. She said you've been up and down for months. She said the footage only showed a moment, not the rest of your behavior. And did you believe her? I asked. He shook his head slowly. No, not anymore. The truth of that settled between us. Quiet. Real. He leaned back, rubbing his face with both hands. She insisted she was trying to protect you, that the pills were harmless, that the comments were misunderstandings, that you misunderstood her intentions. People often hide behind intentions, I said. It spares them from looking at their choices. He swallowed hard. She also said you've been manipulating me, that you're turning me against her. That I am not doing, I replied gently. You're turning because you're seeing. He looked at me, then, eye to eye, and I saw the first solid piece of clarity forming inside him, not yet complete, but undeniable. A knock sounded sharply against the door. This knock did not belong to a nurse. It carried insistence. Before either of us spoke, the door swung open and Emily stepped inside. Her expression was composed, but her eyes were bright with a kind of brittle defiance. She looked from me to Tom, then back to me, her jaw tightening. I need to speak to my husband, she said, privately. Tom didn't move. We're already speaking. She blinked, thrown off balance for a moment. Then she drew herself up, shoulders squared. You're being manipulated, Tom. She's confused. She's telling you things that aren't true. You saw the video. It didn't show anything harmful. It showed you pressuring her, he said evenly. It showed you speaking to her in ways you never mentioned to me. It was out of context, she snapped. And the vitamins. Everyone takes supplements. This is absurd. Her voice rose, too loud for a hospital room. A nurse passing by paused at the doorway, her eyes narrowing slightly. Emily noticed and lowered her tone with visible effort. She needs help, Tom, she said. Real help. This assessment she passed, it doesn't mean she's stable. It doesn't mean she's safe to make decisions about her home or her finances. Tom's voice hardened. The social worker said she's fully competent. Emily's face flushed. You're taking her word over mine? Yes, he said quietly. That single word struck her harder than anything I could have said. Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again. She was searching for the old ground, the ground where her voice shaped his reality. But it wasn't there anymore. She turned toward me, her expression sharpening. I have done everything for this family, everything. And this is how I'm repaid? By being accused of things I never intended? Intentions, I said softly. Don't erase actions. She stared at me for a long, brittle moment, her breathing quickening. Then, without another word, she spun on her heel and left the room, her steps sharp and uneven. The nurse stepped in briefly, ensuring all was calm, then slipped out again. Tom sat back, letting out a long breath. He looked drained, but lighter, like someone who had finally stopped pretending the storm outside was only rain. Mom, he said quietly, I don't know where this goes from here. Forward, I said. In whatever direction truth leads. He nodded slowly, absorbing that. We sat together in silence, not as a mother and a child separated by years of habit, but as two people seeing the same reality at last. And the room felt steadier for it. By the next morning, the hospital felt different. Not outwardly. Machines still hummed. Breakfast carts still clattered. Nurses still spoke in soft, practical tones. But there was a shift, subtle as a draft under a closed door. People no longer looked through me. They looked at me. Sometime after 9, a man in a charcoal suit arrived, carrying a slim leather folder. His badge identified him as Mr. Willis, Legal Services Liaison. He knocked, waited for my acknowledgement, then stepped inside with the composed politeness of someone used to difficult conversations. "Mrs. Hargreaves," he said, taking a seat beside my bed. "I'm here to clarify your rights and to ensure you understand the current situation regarding your care and decision-making." His tone was calm, measured, not paternal, not dismissive. Respectful. That alone felt like an affirmation. He opened the folder. There was a request filed recently regarding possible guardianship or limitations on your legal capacity. This request has now been reviewed alongside the cognitive assessment you completed yesterday. I nodded. "And?" He tapped a page lightly. "You were found to be fully competent. There is no medical or legal basis to pursue guardianship. The request is closed." Closed. A small word with a wide echo. He continued. "Additionally, there are concerns about potential coercion. Administration has documented behavioral evidence, including audio from your room, that suggests outside pressure may have influenced the filing of that request." He didn't say her name. He didn't have to. "This means," he went on, "you remain in full control of your medical decisions, your finances, your home, and any legal documents involving your estate. No actions can be taken without your explicit consent." I breathed slowly, letting that truth settle in each corner of my mind like sunlight chasing out shadow. He watched me with a lawyer's patience. "Do you have any questions about your rights?" "I understand them," I said. "What I'd like to know is what protections exist going forward." He nodded, expecting the question. "We can document a no-interference policy for non-medical relatives, which would require they be supervised during visits. We can also require that all medication or supplements brought from outside be registered and approved." Sensible measures, not punitive, protective. "And my son?" I asked. "He remains your next of kin," Willis said. "His access is unchanged unless you request otherwise." I shook my head. "No, he stays." Willis made a note of it. After he left, the nurse entered with a small smile. "That went well, I assume?" "It went clearly," I replied. "Clarity is all I wanted." She checked my vitals, then sat in the chair Willis had used. "Emily came by this morning," she said softly. "Administration informed her of the restrictions." I raised an eyebrow. "She wasn't pleased," the nurse continued, "but she didn't argue. She left quickly." That didn't surprise me. Control rarely leaves quietly, but it does leave when the structure beneath it collapses. A little later, Tom returned. He seemed steadier today, though still shaken. "They called me," he said. "They told me everything's been resolved." "Resolved is a generous word," I said. He sat beside me. "Mom, I talked to a lawyer myself. I needed to know the truth, not just what Emily said." He confirmed what they found here. She had already drafted documents. They weren't filed yet, but they were ready. He looked at his hands. "She was planning to make decisions for you, about your home, about your accounts, about where you'd live." I didn't interrupt. Some truths need to be spoken all the way through. "She told me she did it out of love," he said quietly. "But love shouldn't erase a person." "No," I said. "It shouldn't." We sat together, not touching, but close in a way we hadn't been in years. When he finally stood to leave, he paused at the door. "You're still yourself," he said, "and I'm finally seeing it again." After he left, the room felt open, unburdened, almost light. Sometimes the restoration of dignity makes the air easier to breathe. Tom came back that evening, not rushing, not hesitant, simply present. There was a steadiness in his movements I hadn't seen in years, as if he'd finally stepped out from under a shadow he didn't know he'd been standing in. He pulled the chair closer to my bed and sat, elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped loosely. Not tense, not shaking, just thoughtful. "Mom," he said quietly, "I've been trying to figure out what to say, but everything sounds small." "Then don't make it big," I replied. "Just make it true." He nodded, eyes lowering for a moment before lifting again. I didn't see what was happening. I didn't want to see it. "She kept saying she was worried about you, that I needed to be prepared, that you were starting to slip." He let out a slow breath. And I believed her, because it was easier than questioning her. "Questioning someone you love is always hard," I said, "but necessary when their version of truth doesn't match the world in front of you." He rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture from boyhood. "She told me I was being dramatic when I watched the footage. She said anyone could twist it to look wrong. She said you were manipulating me with your calmness." His mouth tightened. "I don't think she realizes how that sounded." "Calmness," I said, "is not a strategy. It's simply what's left when a person has lived long enough to understand noise doesn't fix anything." He smiled faintly at that, small but real. "Mom," he said after a pause, "can you tell me honestly, were there signs before all this? Did she treat you poorly when I wasn't around?" I considered my answer, not because I was unsure of it, but because truth delivered harshly can bruise more than it heals. "She treated me," I said, "as someone she needed to adjust, to correct, to put in a corner where I wouldn't interfere with her plans. Not cruelly, not loudly, just steadily, in small cuts." Tom winced. "I'm sorry you didn't tell me." "You weren't ready to hear it," I said. "And I wasn't ready to lose the peace between us." He nodded slowly. "I think I was afraid of disrupting my life, afraid of facing what it meant if she wasn't the person I thought she was." "That's a human fear," I said gently, "but not a permanent one." He leaned back in the chair, eyes glassy, with an emotion he kept carefully controlled. "The lawyer told me everything she planned would have given her legal control over your choices, your home, your accounts, even where you lived. I keep thinking, how close she came." "But she didn't," I said, "because truth arrived before the door closed." He exhaled deeply, his shoulders finally lowering. "I don't know what to do next," he admitted. "About her, about us. But I know one thing. I won't let anyone treat you like you're disappearing." I reached out and placed my hand on his. His fingers closed around mine, not with urgency, but with certainty. A quiet reconciliation. "You don't need to decide everything today," I said. "Clarity takes time. And grief, even for who we thought someone was, takes time too." He nodded, staring at our joined hands. "I want to earn back your trust." "You never lost it," I said. "You just stepped away from it for a while." For the first time since this all began, he smiled fully, tired, worn, but honest. A man returning to himself. He stayed until visiting hours ended. When he stood to leave, he kissed my forehead gently, the way he used to when he was a boy leaving for school. "I'll be back in the morning," he said. When the door closed behind him, the room settled into a soft, open quiet, one that felt less like waiting and more like healing. They discharged me 3 days later, not because my injuries had fully healed, but because everyone now agreed I did not need to be kept under observation. My mind was sound, my vitals were stable, and the staff made a point of saying goodbye with the kind of gentle respect they usually reserve for people who remind them of someone they loved once. Tom insisted on driving me home, though home was no longer a simple word. The house I had lived in for nearly 40 years suddenly felt unfamiliar. Not the walls themselves, but the weight of what had happened inside them. The fall, the pressure, the quiet campaign that had been unfolding behind my back for months. A house holds more than furniture. It holds the imprint of what people do within it, and I wasn't sure I wanted that imprint anymore. When we reached the front door, Tom hesitated. "Are you sure you want to come back here?" he asked. "We could stay at my place for a few days, or I could get you a hotel." I looked at the door, the paint slightly chipped, the brass handle worn smooth by years of living. "Let's just see," I said. Inside, everything was in its place. Too much in its place. Pillows fluffed, blankets folded, counters wiped clean. Emily had always liked order, but this was different. This was the order of someone preparing for a future without consulting the person who lived there. Tom noticed, too. He walked slowly through the living room, touching nothing, as if afraid anything he moved might reveal another truth. "She must have been here while you were in the hospital," he said. "Yes," I replied. "She was preparing." I didn't need to explain what. He understood now. We sat at the kitchen table, quiet, sturdy, the same one where I had once taught him to read, where his father had fixed broken toys, where bills had been paid and arguments softened over cups of tea. It felt smaller today, as though the room itself had tightened around us. "Mom," Tom said, clearing his throat, "you don't have to stay here. Not if it feels unsafe. Not if it reminds you of everything she tried to do." "I know," I said. "But the house isn't the problem. People make shadows, not bricks." He looked down at his hands. "I'm leaving her," he said finally. "Not forever. I don't know. But for now, I can't be in the same space with someone who did this. I need to understand what part of her is real and what part is performance." I reached across the table, resting my hand gently over his. "Take your time. Truth doesn't demand speed." He nodded, his eyes softening. We spent the rest of the afternoon packing small things. Some clothes, a few photographs, my father's old watch. Not because I was fleeing, but because I felt a shift inside me, a sense that my life was about to become something quieter, simpler, and more honest. By evening, Tom helped me settle into a temporary rental near the coast, just for a while, he said, until I decided what I truly wanted. But the moment I stepped inside, I knew. The space was small, but it breathed. No shadows, no expectations, just a place waiting to be lived in. When Tom left for the night, he hugged me longer than usual. "Call me if you need anything," he said. "I will," I replied. "But I'll be all right." And I meant it. For the first time in a long while, I felt the quiet inside me returning, steady, dignified, unbroken. I stood at the window after he drove away, listening to the faint sound of waves pulling at the shore. The world, even at 78, still had room for a new beginning. I settled into the little seaside house more quickly than I expected. Age teaches you that a space becomes home not through ownership, but through breath, through the way you let yourself exist inside it. The first night, I slept with the window cracked open, the sound of the tide rolling in and out like a long, even heartbeat. It soothed something in me I hadn't realized was bruised. The next morning, I boiled water for tea on a stove that wasn't mine yet, but felt patient enough to wait for me. I moved slowly, not from frailty, but from a sense of returning to myself after too many days spent defending what should never have needed defending: my mind, my dignity, my voice. Tom visited often. He carried groceries, replaced light bulbs, checked for drafts around the windows, but mostly he brought his company, quiet, steady, remorseful in a way that wasn't heavy anymore. He didn't speak much about Emily, and I didn't press him. Some truths need to unfold without witnesses. One afternoon, as we sat on the small porch overlooking the dunes, he said, "Mom, I didn't know how far she'd gone. I didn't want to imagine it, but I see it now. All of it." "You see enough," I replied. "That's what matters." He nodded, then looked at the ocean as if hoping it might answer some question he wasn't ready to ask aloud. The waves, loyal as always, offered only their persistence. When he left that day, I stayed on the porch a while. The late sun stretched across the sand, turning it gold, and I felt myself settle even deeper into the life I had chosen. Not one forced upon me, not one shaped by someone else's ambition, but one that belonged to me simply because I was alive to claim it. In the evenings, I walk a little path down to the water. Slowly, but with purpose. My hip aches sometimes, but the ache is honest, and I've learned to trust anything honest. I watch the tide draw lines in the sand, erase them, draw them again. There is comfort in that repetition, a reminder that nothing stays broken forever unless we decide to leave it that way. People think strength in old age looks like endurance, like a body refusing to bend. But the truth is simpler. Strength is the decision to remain yourself when others try to rewrite you, to stand quietly in your own shape, to refuse to disappear. Emily no longer visits. Her silence is not an apology, but it is an absence, and sometimes that is enough. Tom is still sorting through the remains of their life, but he does so with eyes finally open, and that is the gift I never voiced but always wished for him. As for me, I rise each day, make my tea, open the windows, and let the world enter gently. I do not dwell on what might have happened. I dwell on what didn't. I dwell on the small victories, the nurse who listened, the camera that blinked, the truth that surfaced, the dignity that stayed intact. And I dwell on the simple fact that at 78, I found a new place to begin. If you are reading this, and something in my story feels familiar, if you have ever been silenced, dismissed, or pushed toward a smaller version of yourself, just remember, your voice is still yours. Your story is still yours. Speak it when you're ready. Write it if you can. And if you found meaning here, leave a few words of your own. Sometimes a single comment can remind another woman that she is not alone in the room.